Long ago, the Algonquin and Abenaki people told tales of strange and dangerous beings that lived in the deep waters. Among the most feared was N Dam Keno Wet, a merman with a twisted heart. While the rivers and lakes were often places of life and sustenance, these bodies of water were also home to dark secrets. Hunters, fishermen, and those who traveled near the shores were always warned to be cautious, for the waters belonged to more than just the fish. N Dam Keno Wet was no ordinary water spirit. Unlike other beings who might help or guide, he had a more sinister reputation. The people believed he lurked beneath the surface, waiting for moments when humans came too close. His presence was often felt before it was seen, a ripple on a still lake, the soft sound of something swimming near the shore, or a sudden chill that made the hair stand on end. This is the story of the N Dam Keno Wet, the perverted merman from Algonquin mythology. N Dam Keno Wet's tale begins with a man named Keno, whose life, at first, seemed destined for greatness among the Algonquin people. Born into a family of skilled hunters and fishermen, Keno was admired for his talent on the water. He knew the rhythms of the rivers and lakes better than anyone. His canoe moved effortlessly, gliding over the water's surface as he expertly cast his nets. To the outside world, Keno appeared to be a man blessed by the water spirits, but his true nature harbored darkness. From a young age, Keno's ambition stretched beyond providing for his village. He longed for more than the respect he earned through his skills. What started as a healthy respect for the natural world soon turned into a dangerous obsession. He believed that with enough knowledge, he could control the waters themselves, bend them to his will. This was not just about mastery of the craft. Keno craved dominance over the spirits that governed the rivers and lakes, particularly those said to be the most powerful and elusive. The village elders, sensing his growing arrogance, warned him against tampering with forces he did not understand. These spirits, they told him, were not to be summoned or manipulated. The water was alive, governed by ancient, powerful beings whose motives could not be comprehended by humans. Keno, however, dismissed their warnings. He saw the spirits as obstacles in his path to ultimate control. Late one night, under the light of a full moon, Keno set off in search of an ancient water spirit that he believed held the key to unlocking his power. He paddled to a secluded lake deep in the forest, far from the watchful eyes of his people. Here he had discovered ancient symbols carved into the rock, remnants of rituals performed long ago by those who sought the spirit's favor. With a reckless confidence, Keno began the ritual, chanting words of summoning that he had pieced together from forbidden texts. The wind howled, and the waters of the lake grew still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the surface of the water rippled violently, and a towering figure rose from the depths, the spirit of the lake, ancient and terrible. Keno, blinded by his own ambition, demanded power from the spirit. He offered his servitude in exchange for dominion over the waters, but the spirit saw through his arrogance and recognized the dark desires festering in his heart. Rather than granting Keno power, the spirit cursed him. The water surged around him, pulling him into the depths, as his body twisted and transformed into the monstrous form of N Dam Keno Wet. Now bound to the very waters he sought to control, N Dam Keno Wet was condemned to live beneath the surface, cut off from the human world. His greed and desire for control had turned him into a creature of darkness, forever cursed to haunt the waters he once loved, preying on those who ventured too close. When Keno emerged from the depths of the cursed waters as N Dam Keno Wet, he was no longer recognizable as the man he once was. The transformation had not just corrupted his spirit, but it also grotesquely reshaped his body into a nightmarish form that mirrored the darkness of his heart. From the waist up, N Dam Keno Wet retained a semblance of his former human self, but it was twisted in unnatural ways. His skin had turned a pale, sickly blue, as if drained of life by the cold, dark waters. It glistened with a wet sheen, constantly slick and damp no matter how long he remained out of the water. His arms were unnaturally long and muscular, ending in webbed hands that were as strong as they were deadly. Each finger was tipped with sharp claw-like nails, designed to rip through the water, and through flesh with terrifying ease. The once handsome face of Keno was now a mask of horror. His eyes, formerly filled with ambition and greed, were now pale and glassy, reflecting the lifelessness of the deep. They gleamed with a predatory light, always searching, always watching for prey. His mouth, once capable of charming speech, had twisted into a wide, malicious grin, filled with rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. His voice, when he spoke, was no longer human. It was a guttural, rasping sound that echoed the hiss of the waves and the roar of the river currents. His hair, which had once been thick and dark, now clung to his scalp in long, tangled locks, matted with algae and debris from the depths of the water. It trailed behind him as he moved through the water, giving him a ghostly, otherworldly appearance. His skin was covered in patches of iridescent scales that shimmered in the moonlight, reflecting the eerie glow of the water around him. The lower half of his body was where the true horror of his transformation was most apparent. His legs had fused into a powerful, serpentine tail, covered in shimmering silver and blue scales. This tail was not only long and flexible but also incredibly strong, propelling him through the water with silent, predatory grace. At the end of his tail was a large, fan-like fin, sharp and translucent, which cut through the water like a blade. The fin was not only a tool for movement, but also a weapon, capable of striking with deadly force. Despite his terrifying appearance, there was something strangely hypnotic about N Dam Keno Wet. His otherworldly form, combined with the way the light played off his scales and the graceful movements of his tail, gave him an almost ethereal beauty from afar. But up close, the horrifying reality of his form would become clear. N Dam Keno Wet's transformation into a merman did not just alter his physical form, it twisted his mind, deepening his already corrupt nature. His obsession with control had once been limited to mastering the waters, but now it manifested in far more sinister ways. Stripped of his humanity, N Dam Keno Wet became consumed by perverse desires, particularly targeting the women who came near his watery domain. His power as a merman was rooted in manipulation and deception. Unlike other spirits who might show themselves boldly, N Dam Keno Wet preferred to lurk beneath the surface, watching his potential victims from the shadows. He would remain hidden, observing the women as they performed their daily tasks by the riverbanks or lakesides. Whether they were washing clothes, gathering water, or simply resting near the shore, they were unaware of his cold, unblinking gaze fixed upon them. What made N Dam Keno Wet so dangerous was his ability to manipulate the water around him to suit his twisted intentions. The stillness of the lake could suddenly turn calm and inviting, luring women closer to the edge. A glimmer of light would dance on the water's surface, creating a mesmerizing effect that drew them in. They would feel a strange pull, as though the lake itself was calling to them, urging them to step closer. Once they were near enough, N Dam Keno Wet would strike. His upper body would emerge from the water, glistening in the moonlight, with his slick, scaled skin and webbed hands outstretched. From a distance, he might still appear human enough to fool his victims. His chest and arms, though covered in slimy scales, resembled that of a man's, and his presence was often mistaken for that of a lost fisherman or someone in need of help. But the moment they looked into his eyes, they would see the truth, the predatory gleam, the hunger that went beyond the need for survival. N Dam Keno Wet's touch was cold and suffocating, like the deep waters he came from. He would grasp his victims with his clawed, webbed hands, pulling them into the water with a strength far beyond human. His tail, long and powerful, would wrap around their legs, binding them and ensuring there was no escape. His grip was inescapable, and his touch was invasive, violating their sense of safety and peace. For N Dam Keno Wet, it wasn't just about capturing women. His twisted mind delighted in their terror, in the way their fear fed his power. He took pleasure in corrupting the peaceful relationship humans had with the water. What was once a source of life and nourishment became a place of danger and despair under his influence. His desires were not rooted in companionship or love, but in the need to dominate and possess, to take what he believed was his by right of power. In the Algonquin and Abenaki communities, these tales served as a grim reminder to never underestimate the dangers of the water. N Dam Keno Wet was a symbol of unchecked lust and the consequences of succumbing to dark desires. His actions corrupted the natural world and left a lasting scar on the human soul. As the stories of N Dam Keno Wet spread among the Algonquin and Abenaki tribes, so too did the fear he inspired. The once peaceful and serene waters that provided life to the people became tinged with a sense of dread. The lakes and rivers that sustained their communities were no longer places of refuge or comfort, but areas where one might fall prey to the twisted desires of the merman who lurked below the surface. The fear was most palpable among the women. They could no longer approach the water without feeling an ominous presence, as though the merman was watching from the depths, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Mothers warned their daughters to stay far from the shore, and women who once gathered water or washed clothes by the lake now traveled in groups, hoping that strength in numbers might keep them safe from the merman's grasp. The stories around the campfires grew more and more detailed, each tale seeming more horrific than the last. Some recounted how young women would vanish without a trace after venturing too close to the lake alone, their absence blamed on N Dam Keno Wet. Others spoke of women who had barely escaped the merman's clutches, returning home shivering and pale, their eyes wide with terror and their minds forever marked by the encounter. It was said that once a woman was touched by N Dam Keno Wet, she was never the same. Even if she escaped his physical grasp, his presence lingered in her mind, haunting her dreams and filling her waking moments with fear. The fear of N Dam Keno Wet extended beyond the women, however. The men of the tribe, too, were cautious, for the merman's powers were not limited to his attacks on women. N Dam Keno Wet could manipulate the water itself, and fishermen, hunters, and travelers often found themselves at the mercy of the currents he controlled. Canoes that were once easy to maneuver would suddenly capsize without warning. Calm waters would erupt into deadly whirlpools, dragging men to their deaths beneath the waves. Even the most seasoned hunters, who knew every bend and current of the rivers, found themselves unsettled. They would feel strange pulls on their fishing lines or see shadows moving beneath their boats, though nothing surfaced. Some spoke of hearing soft, whispering voices, calling them to step closer to the water's edge. Others claimed that at night, the water itself seemed to ripple with a life of its own, as though something was stirring deep within. It wasn't long before entire villages began to change their behavior. The elders imposed strict rules to protect the people from the merman's malevolent influence. No one was allowed to go to the water alone, especially after dark, when N Dam Keno Wet was most active. Camps and villages were built farther from the shores, and rituals of protection were performed before any journey to the water. The fear of N Dam Keno Wet was not just a fear of a physical threat, but a fear of the unknown. The merman represented the unpredictable nature of the world, where danger could come not from a storm or a wild animal, but from something far darker and more insidious. He was a reminder that not all spirits were benevolent, and that some sought only to harm those who trespassed too close. Despite their efforts to avoid him, N Dam Keno Wet's presence remained a constant threat. His ability to strike fear into the hearts of the people was as much a part of his power as his physical strength. The knowledge that he could appear at any moment, silently slipping out of the water, left the people in a constant state of vigilance. The sound of a ripple on a still lake, the sight of an unfamiliar shadow moving beneath the surface, or the feel of an unexpected chill in the air could send a wave of panic through the village. The elders would gather the people around the fire and remind them of the dangers that lurked beyond the visible world. They warned that even though N Dam Keno Wet's form was confined to the water, his influence could reach beyond it, especially if the people let their guard down. His name was spoken in whispers, and his legend grew with every new story of someone who had crossed paths with him. Hey everyone, just a quick intermission here. I wanted to say thank you for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. Did you know that over 80% of you who are watching right now aren't subscribed to the channel? If you've enjoyed this content so far, it would be incredible if you could hit that subscribe button. It's a small gesture, but it really helps the channel grow and ensures that you won't miss any more of our fascinating stories we explore together. Also, if you're feeling generous, please give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share with anyone else who may enjoy it. Your support really does make a difference and keeps the content coming. Thanks again, and let's get back to the story. Though the fear of N Dam Keno Wet gripped the Algonquin and Abenaki people, they were not without hope or defenses. The tribes had long-standing traditions for dealing with the spirits of nature, both benevolent and malevolent, and N Dam Keno Wet, despite his terrifying presence, was no exception. The people turned to their shamans and spiritual leaders, seeking guidance on how to protect themselves from the merman's predation. The shamans, wise in the ways of the spirit world, knew that N Dam Keno Wet's curse bound him to the water, but it also made him vulnerable to certain sacred rituals and protections. To combat his influence, they devised numerous charms, wards, and spells aimed at keeping the merman at bay. They gathered herbs known to repel evil spirits, such as sweetgrass and cedar, which were believed to create a protective barrier around the wearer. These herbs were burned in ceremonial fires, and the smoke was used to purify the shores where the people gathered water, ensuring that N Dam Keno Wet's presence would be driven away. One of the most effective protections was the creation of small amulets. These charms were crafted from bones, shells, and stones found near sacred places. The shamans would inscribe them with symbols representing the water spirits, invoking their protection. These amulets were worn around the necks of those who needed to approach the water, especially the women, offering them some level of safety from N Dam Keno Wet's grasp. It was said that as long as the amulet was worn, the merman could not come near the wearer, for the protective spirits would shield them from harm. In addition to spiritual defenses, the people also adopted physical strategies to protect themselves from N Dam Keno Wet. Groups of warriors took it upon themselves to patrol the shores, particularly at night when the merman was most active. Armed with spears and bows, they watched for any sign of movement beneath the water's surface. They had learned to recognize the subtle disturbances in the water that often preceded his attacks, a ripple where there should be none, or a sudden stillness that seemed unnatural. Though many warriors tried to confront N Dam Keno Wet directly, few succeeded. He was a master of the waters, able to disappear beneath the surface in an instant, leaving nothing but dark, swirling currents in his wake. He could travel through the rivers and lakes faster than any human, making him nearly impossible to catch. Many brave warriors returned with stories of seeing his silhouette slip away into the depths just as they thought they had him cornered. Others were not so fortunate. Their boats overturned, their bodies found days later, lifeless and pale, with no explanation other than the touch of the merman's wrath. Despite these challenges, the people did not give up. They continued to refine their tactics, learning to strike quickly and without hesitation when N Dam Keno Wet appeared. They crafted specialized harpoons with barbed tips, designed to pierce his slippery skin and hold fast, even if he tried to escape back into the water. Some warriors dipped their weapons in sacred oils and herbs, believing that the power of these sacred tools would weaken N Dam Keno Wet's supernatural strength. The shamans also developed rituals aimed at weakening the merman's power over the water. Large ceremonies were held along the shore, where entire communities gathered to invoke the aid of friendly water spirits. Songs were sung, drums were beaten, and sacred powders were cast into the water, creating ripples that the people believed would disrupt N Dam Keno Wet's control. The ceremonies were designed to remind the merman that the water was not his alone to command, and that the people, too, had the right to live and thrive near the rivers and lakes. In some stories, the shamans were able to strike bargains with lesser water spirits who opposed N Dam Keno Wet. These spirits, while not powerful enough to defeat him directly, could offer warnings or create distractions, giving the people more time to defend themselves. The shamans would listen to the whispers of the wind and the rush of the currents, interpreting the signs sent by these spirits as they guided the warriors in their defense against the merman. Though N Dam Keno Wet remained elusive, These spiritual and physical defenses offered the people a sense of control over the situation. They could not rid the waters of the merman entirely, but with careful planning and strong protections, they could limit his influence and safeguard their families. As time passed, the story of N Dam Keno Wet became less about defeating the merman and more about surviving in harmony with the natural world. The people learned to read the signs of his presence. They understood that while they could not destroy him, they could avoid his grasp by respecting the spirits of the water and remaining aware of the dangers he represented. The shamans too shifted their approach. Instead of seeking ways to banish N Dam Keno Wet, they focused on maintaining balance. The people no longer saw N Dam Keno Wet as merely a monster to be fought, but as a reminder of the complex relationship between humans and the spirits that govern the world around them. The lakes and rivers, though still sources of life, were approached with respect and caution. The people no longer feared the water outright, but they understood that they could never become complacent. The elders continued to tell the story of N Dam Keno Wet around the fire, warning the younger generations to be mindful of the dangers hidden beneath the surface. His tale was passed down not only as a story of a lurking threat, but also as a lesson in humility. The merman was a symbol of the consequences of greed and arrogance, both his own and anyone who would dare disrespect the natural forces that governed the world. Rituals honoring the water spirits continued, not just as protection from N Dam Keno Wet, but as a way to maintain the harmony between the human and spirit worlds. The people made regular offerings at the lakes and rivers, thanking the spirits for their bounty and asking for their guidance. These ceremonies became part of daily life, reinforcing the understanding that respect for the unseen powers was essential to maintaining peace and prosperity. And yet, even as N Dam Keno Wet's story faded into legend, there were always whispers. On quiet nights, when the moon was full and the water lay still, some claimed they could hear his voice, faint and distant, carried on the wind. The ripple of the water or a sudden chill in the air would remind the people that N Dam Keno Wet was still out there, watching, waiting. He had never been truly defeated, but the people had learned to live with his presence. His legacy was one of caution, respect, and the enduring lesson that the natural world, with all its beauty and danger, must be approached with humility and care.